So when I finished my research around Orellana's expedition down the Amazon and the first explorers of the Amazon traveling downriver and exploring into the interior, I was left with a handful of questions about the ancient Amazon and the possible hidden civilizations that exist in the interior of South America that really kept me up at night. Now, the Amazon is probably the most formidable environment in the entire world to explore. It's really one of the last frontiers. You have the Amazon and you have the Sahara, but I would really put the Amazon probably above the Sahara as far as the level of danger that you endure trying to explore that environment, as well as probably the possibility of civilizations just being found on that unexplored and unconquered frontier. It's just that formidable. The entire environment of the Amazon has completely evolved and been bred for self-defense. It's known as a green hell or a green desert. There's very few naturally edible foods there, and all of the animals that are there have been bred and have evolved for this incredibly hostile environment. That, like I said on the last video about Orellana, the food chain of the Amazon really puts human beings somewhere at the bottom, and especially the explorers of the Amazon who have probably never been there before. So my first question about hidden civilizations in the Amazon is, what was El Dorado really? Today we think of El Dorado in the same way we think of it in the Disney movie, that it's a lost Native American city of gold, a very, very rich city, or perhaps an entire civilization hidden off somewhere deep in the interior of South America, although Disney puts it in Mexico, which is odd to me, but whatever. But that's really not actually what El Dorado was, according to the original legend. The original legend came from somewhere in Ecuador or Colombia, and it was around Lake Guatavita in one of the tribes nearby there, probably the Muisca tribe. And they would essentially have this king who would sit on a raft, or it may have even been a golden raft, and he was covered in some kind of gold dust, like either literal gold dust or thin, malleable sheets of gold that were placed across his body. And then when he reached the center of this primordial lake, he would dive in and essentially wash the gold off of him. And it's even thought that they would give gold offerings such as jewelry or ornaments or gold statues, gold artifacts, what have you, into this lake, essentially giving piety to the gods, giving offering to the gods to bless the tribe, possibly to bring the rains for helping harvesting crops and growing crops. That's the original legend of El Dorado. And eventually that evolved into these lost cities of gold that Spaniards would hear about somewhere further off in the interior. Now, Lake Guatavita, it is in the greater region of Amazonia, but not really what we call Amazonia. And these stories of these lost golden civilizations hidden somewhere in the interior of the Amazon began permeating out and spreading their way through this new Spanish colonial world that was being established on the west coast of South America, on the opposite side of the Andes from the Amazon. And so Spaniards became fascinated by this idea, and they saw some glimpses and heard evidence and rumors from tribes on the peripheral of the Amazon of greater civilizations in the interior, but the Spaniards never actually found the civilizations. They were too far away, and they never seemed to actually be along the Amazon River. 500 years later, I have the ability to look back on this, knowing much more than the Spaniards exploring the Amazon did at the time, and try to piece together something that makes sense. And what I think is that El Dorado, the actual legend of El Dorado, probably really was about this gilded one, or the golden one, this king who would go out on the lake covered in gold and dive in and wash the gold off of him for the gods. However, I also think that El Dorado, the legend, meaning lost golden civilizations or hidden civilizations in the Amazon, is also true as well, because we would hear about Percy Fawcett. He heard about places off in the Amazon as well that were these rich, sophisticated, advanced, large, sprawling civilizations, but he had never actually referred to it as El Dorado. He called it the Lost City of Z or Zed. And my impression looking back on this is I think that El Dorado was probably all of the Amazon. I think the entire Amazon was filled with huge, sprawling, shockingly sophisticated civilizations, not only along the river, but in the interiors as well. And I think that even to this day, the Amazon, the environment just hasn't been conquered enough for us to be able to really get in there and understand what was going on in that world. But I have no doubts that during the time of Orellana, 1541 to 1542, going down the Amazon River, there definitely were these filthy rich civilizations existing within the Amazon, and that by the time Percy Fawcett came, the reason that he may have never actually found them is because Spanish disease had spread throughout the Amazon and had wiped out millions and millions of people, entire civilizations just disappearing overnight and then being swallowed up by the jungle.
Okay, so I am really excited about this. For years now, I've been wanting to know what my DNA percentage results would be. I know my family's history going back through the late 1800s pretty well, but anything before that, it gets pretty fuzzy. And so to get my DNA results, I actually partnered with MyHeritage. They sent me a DNA test kit, and taking the test was actually super easy. I just swabbed my cheeks for a couple of minutes, and the results that we're about to see cover more regions than any other test. It'll give me a percentage breakdown of my origins across 42 different supported ethnicities and over 2,000 geographic regions. It'll also help me find new relatives I didn't even know I had based on the DNA results. All right, it says, Luke, ready to explore your ethnicity? This is crazy. I'm kind of nervous here. This is my first time seeing this. Luke, you are 38.2% English. Wow. So I knew I had a lot of English in me. 35.9% Scottish and Welsh. Wow, that is crazy. 6.7% Dutch. That's insane. 6.3% Danish. Man, I'm as European as it gets. And 12.9% 4 more ethnicities. Wow, I actually see Ireland on there. All right, so estimated, I am 5.4% Irish, 3.7% Breton, 2.1% French, and 1.7% Germanic. I wish I could talk to those people. Another thing that's interesting is to think about all of my 70% of me that is English and Scottish. All of my ancestors who must have lived during medieval times and seen a lot of incredible things. I love the story of Henry V. I find that period of European, English, United UK history to be just absolutely incredibly fascinating. And now that I know that I had ancestors living during those periods, it's kind of overwhelming, and it's kind of sad that I don't get to talk to those people. But now I feel connected to them, and when I watch movies or play games like Kingdom Come about that time period, I'm going to feel quite a bit more connected to my ancestors. This is really, really cool. And just for you guys watching, MyHeritage is running a special promotion where you can get your very own DNA kit for just $29, 29 pounds, or 29 euros by using code LUKE29 at checkout. This is significantly lower than any other option. Again, that's your very own DNA kit for $29, 29 pounds, or 29 euros by using code LUKE29 at checkout. MyHeritage is committed in its privacy policy to never sell or license genetic data. So get your DNA test kit today by clicking the link in the bio or scanning the QR code on screen, and finally find out your origins and DNA percentage results. Thank you to MyHeritage for sponsoring this video. Now, back to the show.
The next question I have is whether or not Orellana made anything up. This was something that was kind of common among some explorers. They would make up things or exaggerate things to be able to secure funding for their next expedition. Because this was, for some of these explorers, this was how they were actually going to make a livelihood, make a name for themselves, become famous, become rich, or secure a second opportunity to go back and perform another major conquest. Now, a lot of scholars think that Orellana was drastically making things up, that the huge snakes and sprawling cities and the mystical towns that he visited and the shamans that he saw, and especially the lighter skinned Amazon women warriors that seem to reflect the legends of the Amazon Greek warriors from Greek mythology, they especially thought that that was made up to try to allure the king into funding another expedition. But I don't know. I think that there were so many things that existed in the American world that he saw that really don't make sense to the Western European mind. And after the Spaniards left, they spread influenza across the Amazon. And every future return that Europeans made into the interior of the Amazon, they found less and less and less of what Orellana was able to find. And as time went on, Europeans became suspicious of Orellana. And by the late 1800s and the early 1900s, during Percy Fawcett's expeditions, they were essentially saying, Orellana, he was just lying about everything that he saw. None of it was true. He was just lying to secure funding. But in reality, I think that probably what happened was that the disease was leaping in front of the Spanish army and wiping out Native American civilization by the millions. Entire cities were disappearing overnight, again being swallowed up by the jungle to never be seen again. We have to remember that when Pizarro arrived in Peru, the Inca emperor Atahualpa's father was already dying of some kind of disease. And most likely what had happened is in the early 1500s, let's travel out of South America, back up through Mexico, back up into the Caribbean. There were European traders who were poking around on the coast of the Yucatan and interacting with the Maya people, just barely, not conquesting, not really going inland, but just landing upon the shore, interacting and speaking with these people. Well, they infected those Maya people with European disease, and that disease began sweeping across the Maya world. By the time when Cortez arrived in 1519 on the coast of Veracruz, he was meeting with the Maya people, the Mesoamerican people, and he describes them as small, weak, and sickly. Well, they had been getting sick for the last 2 decades. Now, let's travel to the other side of the Maya world, off the coast of Belize, the Caribbean coast. It's going down Belize, down modern-day Central America, through Panama, spreading into Colombia and across the Amazon, down into the Inca Empire, where in 1532, Pizarro then arrives. After Cortez has conquered the Aztec Empire, they followed the gold trade routes down into South America. Pizarro arrives, and now this same disease is spreading across the Inca realm. The Inca were in trade and war with the Amazonians, so this disease was also already spreading through the Amazon as well. It was jumping entire continents ahead of the Spaniards. So, the things that Orellana saw, I really highly doubt that he was exaggerating. Maybe they were romanticizing the things that they saw, possibly. But I think that if they were to do that, they probably would have exaggerated much, much more. I just read through the first-hand accounts, the historical sources of Orellana's expedition written by Gaspar de Carvajal, and I really think that if they were going to exaggerate, they would have exaggerated a hell of a lot more. My next question is, were the large cities of the ancient Amazon built along the river, or were they built inland? Now, Orellana went down the stretch of almost the entire Amazon River, where the Coco River meets the Napo River, where the Napo River meets the Amazon. He traveled from there all the way to the mouth of the Amazon. And along this way, he did see really large cities, and some of them made out of stone with complex highways going off inland and large farms. He did find evidence, and he visited sophisticated civilizations. However, none of these civilizations seemed to quench the thirst that he had for something that was more similar to Cusco or Tenochtitlan. So the real question is, when he was hearing about these stories of civilizations and cities that were further inland, he hears about these inland cities on multiple different occasions. The real question is, were those cities bigger? Were they more sophisticated? And are those inland cities what we have actually all been looking for and wondering about for the last 450 years. If this is the case, oh, you know what? I'm just now thinking about this. In the Maya world, we do not actually see the largest ancient cities along the main riversides or the main rivers of the Maya world. We see the largest cities isolated far off in flat parts of the jungle. And as I'm talking about this right now, I'm just realizing that if you take that and you paste it into the Amazon, it makes a lot more sense. One of the reasons that El Mirador, this primordial fertile crescent of the Maya world, it's a pre-classic Maya city that stretches back to 800 BC, even probably 1000 BC and further. This was the place where the Maya built the two largest pyramids they would ever build at the very beginning of time. Now, the reason that El Mirador was settled, probably, is because fighting along the riversides and the coastlines was the most dangerous place to be early on when these cultures were first inhabiting the area of the Maya world. But El Mirador was able to take off because it was deep in the jungle and isolated from everyone else. And so those people were able to live a more peaceful, productive life, and probably that led to a greater amount of agriculture and cultural meshing and the ability to produce wealth and begin trading with other people. This probably happened in the Amazon as well. And that's why whenever we hear the stories of these great civilizations and these huge, rich cities in the Amazon, they never seem to be along the riverbank. Probably because the riverbank in this early primordial time, let's say 5,000 to 10,000 years ago, was always the most dangerous place to be. And so cities were only able to grow in places that were isolated and safe. Wow, I'm just realizing this. I'm just realizing that this rule applies to the Amazon as well. And so probably when you look at satellite images of the Amazon, try to get as far away from as you can in the little pockets of green. Try to get as far away as you can from two different rivers. And probably somewhere in there, there's a great city that arose, who knows, thousands of years ago. And that might actually be what Orellana was hearing about as he was traveling along the Amazon River. Something else I'm curious about that you hear about in the Aztec world, you hear about in the Inca world, and you hear about it through the firsthand accounts of Orellana and Carvajal going down the Amazon, was their exposure to sorcerers and witchcraft and magic. This has always fascinated me because even though I'm a Christian, I'm a big proponent of the fact that other religions are probably not all hocus pocus, and that even Christianity is probably not what it seems to be on the surface. That religion itself is much more complicated and nuanced than any of us can possibly understand. And I don't think that people who were really cognitively no different than you and I living today. I've said this before, that it's very likely that the most intelligent person who ever lived, the person with the highest IQ in all of humanity, was a Native American who lived in pre-Columbian times. That's very possible. I mean, it's a roll of the dice. And so I don't think that these people committed their lives to believing superstitions and practicing witchcraft that produced absolutely no results whatsoever. I just think that there is a realm of understanding and an understanding of how to extrapolate results out of the natural world around you that Europeans just didn't take a hold of 2,500 years ago when Western civilization and Western thought really began in Athens, Greece. I think that we just took a different path than the Native Americans did, and the way that we process and interact with the world, and maybe even the way our brains are wired and what our brains, the signals that our brains can receive, are completely different than what Native Americans were aware of. It just seemed like Native Americans were on a completely different frequency than Europeans. And so I really wish that I could somehow understand what these Spaniards were seeing and what not only Amazonians, but all Native Americans were really up to and what the nuances of their witchcraft, magic, and sorcery really was and what it really meant to them. Another thing that I never realized that Orellana encountered was people with elongated skulls. It says that during the first interaction, when Orellana and his men jump off the boat to raid the first large city that they see because they've been starving for the last 2 months and they're looking for food of any kind, as they're raiding the city and setting fire to some of the huts to get the Amazonians to run away, from somewhere deep within the city, these huge, grotesque, scary-looking warriors with flattened foreheads and elongated skulls in the back that are painted with red war paint show up from somewhere further off within the city. There was probably a palace or somewhere that these warriors were deployed to be able to defend the city. And I never realized that Orellana had actually seen people with elongated skulls. Definitely when Pizarro arrived in the Inca world, royal or noble Inca people were participating in the act of skull elongation. This is something that goes all the way back to the Paracas culture in like 1000 BC, and then goes through the Nazca, and then essentially becomes absorbed into the Tiwantisuyu, which is the Inca Empire, thousands of years later. I didn't realize that there was anybody in the Amazon taking part in this as well. But I suppose it makes sense because really this is something that was going on across all of the Americas. I don't think people realize when we think about skull elongation, you might think about it in the Maya world, you might think about it in the Aztecs, you definitely think about it in South America among the Paracas and Nazca people. People may not realize that it was still happening during the time of the Inca, but not with normal people, just noblemen. But it was also happening all the way up here in the woodlands. I'm in North Carolina. It was happening among the mound people as well. So I suppose it makes sense that it was also happening in the Amazon. But it seems like among each culture, the customs and practices of whose skulls were elongated is different. This is the first time in all of the Native American world that I have ever heard of warriors with skulls being elongated. And actually nowhere in the Amazon did they write that any of the chieftains or the cultural leaders that they met had elongated skulls. The only people who did were these warriors that they saw. I find that pretty fascinating. And it really kind of shows you the cultural differences and the nuances across the Native American world. Wouldn't it be cool to be able to find archaeological remains of these bodies with elongated skulls in the Amazon? And the last question is, how do you find a lost city in the Amazon? Now, all of the cities that have been found so far are really just by accident. That's kind of how a lot of things happen in archaeology. Like Göbekli Tepe was found by accident by a farmer. Farmers tend to find a lot of things, and especially true in the Amazon. On the peripherals of the Amazon, you have local farmers who are extending their land. They cut down the trees, they're creating farmland, and as they're out there, they realize that they're hitting mound sites, and they end up finding these huge, sprawling, like miles-long geometric patterns that are carved as earthen structures into the ground. And hundreds of these sites have been found around the peripheral of the Amazon. But it's not actually from intentional exploration, it's just from civilization, these local people living out in the boonies kind of slowly encroaching on the peripheral of the Amazon and finding these things by accident. But in reality, you have to think that because this was on the peripheral of the Amazon and not deep in the interior or along the river, this is hundreds of miles away from the Amazon River that these places are being found. These are really just people who were living on the peripheral that were far away from the hubbub of what was going on. Exploring the interior, trying to find these huge hidden cities and civilizations, that's really never been done yet. There has been some LiDAR that has been scanned in the interior, and they've found huge archaeological sites. One of them, the site of Kiriguyu, and then another one that was found recently in Ecuador with like as many as 2,000 structures found in it. Some of these cities are estimated to have inhabited up to 1 million people, which is the same size as ancient Rome at its height. That's enormous. And that's just one city in the Amazon. Which another thing is, some of the estimations of the population of the Amazon in 1541 when Orellana arrives is only around 2 million people. But then now, since the late 90s, we're finding some of these cities, just a few examples of them, that they're estimating 1 million people lived in. Well, that means we need to take the estimation of how many people were living in the Amazon and greatly multiply that. Another one of the coolest insights that I got was when Orellana and his expedition stopped at a place that they called Pottery Town. And it's kind of this slice of land that is between the small tributary where the Japara River comes down and where the Japara River meets the Amazon. So it's these 3 rivers, or I should say 2 main rivers and one little small connecting river, and it's this slice of land. And it's thought to have been somewhere right here in this area that he came across a place called Pottery Town. And when he went in, it was essentially the entire town was made up of storage houses where he would walk into these huge long buildings that would be filled to the brim with some of the nicest, most elegant pieces he had ever seen. And you have to remember that some of these Spaniards were well-traveled and well-educated people, and Spain was colonized by both Greek and Roman cities as well. So people who were growing up in colonial Renaissance Spain were very aware with the artistry and the magnificence of Greco-Roman civilization. And so while he's at this pottery town, he's looking at the pots and he's like, wow, these really are amazing. I mean, this is on level with Roman artifacts that I have seen from my childhood back home. How are they able to create these things? And surely they're not making it all for this town. It looks more like this is a factory town that is here to make these vessels, and they must be selling them somewhere further off inland. Now, we don't really know if this is something that Orellana thought or if it's something that he had kind of been told by one of the locals, but it was certainly the impression that he got. I found this really interesting because what it gives us is an area that is either nearby or is connected to larger civilizations somewhere further in the interior. Again, this was something he had heard going all the way down the stretch of the river, was that these great cities he was looking for were somewhere further to the interior. And it was just too difficult for Orellana to be able to get out there because they were barely surviving native attacks while they were on the river. If they tried to go further inland, there's no way that they would have survived the expedition. So I went and looked at where the Japara River meets the Amazon River on satellite imagery. And I have to say, I totally agree with Orellana's assessment. I actually think it would be a perfect place for a city that is selling goods to inland cities, both north and south of the Amazon River. And I think that if you were going to try to find a lost city in the Amazon, well, searching that little slice of land between where the Japara meets the Amazon and the little tributary runs between them, I think that starting there, you could definitely find pottery because pottery is indestructible. And then perhaps from there, you may be able to branch out and find something. When archaeologists do explore ancient settlements on the peripheral of the Amazon, they come across highways. And the highways, you would think, would be these low flattened areas where they would flatten out the land and create these long highways in the Amazon. What they were actually doing is what the Maya would do in their own world is create something called sock bays. And it was like these roads that were picked up 10 meters off the ground. And essentially what this did was it allowed you to get, because it rains so much, it allows you to get up out of the muck and walk on an elevated platform. And then sometimes when it would rain and the sides of these roads would fill up with water, they would hop in canoes and then sail down the side of the highways. And also Orellana saw these highways branching out of some of the great cities that he saw along the river. So I think that if you're looking for a lost civilization or a lost city somewhere in the Amazon, starting right here in this area of where they found a village that they called Pottery Town, I think would be a pretty good start. Hell, maybe it's something I'll do myself. And just for you guys watching, MyHeritage is running a special promotion where you can get your very own DNA kit for just $29, 29 pounds, or 29 euros by using code Luke29 at checkout. This is significantly lower than any other option. Again, that's your very own DNA kit for $29, 29 pounds, or 29 euros by using code Luke29 at checkout. I'm Luke Caverns. If you'd like more videos on the history and mystery of places all around the world, well, please like and subscribe for more.